Okay, let's talk about vaccines. First off, how do they work? Well, to understand vaccines, we'll need to understand a little bit about the immune system. The immune system has a bunch of moving parts, but for this video, we're going to focus on a type of white blood cell called the B cell. B cells make antibodies, which are proteins that bind to pathogens, neutralizing them and marking them for destruction. Pathogens, by the way, are substances that make us sick. Think bacteria, viruses, parasites, and so on. When your body encounters a pathogen that it's never seen before, your B cells have to first recognize and bind to it. Then, with the help of other immune cells, they have to proliferate, that is, make a bunch of copies of themselves. Some of the copies then spew out a bunch of antibodies to directly fight the infection. These copies are called plasma cells, and they last for about 4 to 5 days. Some copies remain in the bloodstream for a super long time, ready to proliferate if the same pathogen tries to launch another attack. These copies are called memory cells. This process is called the primary immune response. Here's the issue with the primary immune response. It's slow. It takes about 3 to 6 days for B cells to start making antibodies, and it takes 10 days for antibody levels to reach their peak. If our B cells don't make antibodies fast enough, that's a big problem, because, well, death is not a particularly good health outcome. What's more, antibody levels decline quite rapidly after reaching peak levels. But both of these issues disappear the subsequent times that we encounter the same pathogen. The second, third, fourth, 368th time that the pathogen tries to invade, our memory B cells respond within hours, not days, and we reach peak antibody levels in 2 to 3 days instead of 10. In addition, the peak antibody level is higher and sustained over a longer period of time. On top of this, the antibodies produced bind more strongly to pathogens, so they're able to do their jobs more effectively. This process is the secondary immune response, and it is vastly superior to the primary. Vaccination introduces a weakened or killed version of the pathogen to our bodies to trigger the primary immune response. That way, if we're exposed to that pathogen later down the line, our bodies can launch the more effective secondary immune response against that pathogen and kick its butt. This makes us less likely to become sick after an exposure, and if we do get sick, we clear the infection faster, which reduces the pathogen's spread. If we have a hypothetical population of people fully vaccinated against, say, polio, the virus doesn't really have anywhere to spread because all of its potential victims are protected. In this situation, the virus is kind of like a fire that's burned up all of its kindling. There's no more fuel or people that it can use to propagate itself, so it becomes extinct. I use polio as an example because we are so close to eradicating polio. We've done so for 2 out of the 3 types of polio virus, and the last type is now only endemic in 2 countries. Okay, back to this hypothetical population. Let's now say that a few people in this group aren't vaccinated. Because the vast majority of people are vaccinated, it's still really difficult for polio virus to spread. So these unvaccinated individuals are still protected. This is a concept called herd immunity, and we need it to protect the most vulnerable populations, those who can't get vaccinated because of pre-existing health conditions or those who are too young to receive vaccines. The key here is that herd immunity still requires the vast majority of people to be vaccinated. The percentage of people that must be vaccinated in order to maintain herd immunity varies with each pathogen and how transmissible it is. For polio, it's about 80%, and for measles, it's about 95%. This is why vaccine hesitancy can be so destabilizing. If lots of people refuse vaccines, they endanger the population around them. This has all been tested and documented. The science behind vaccines is sound, but it's almost impossible to have an uncontroversial conversation about vaccines. Vaccine hesitancy has been around for as long as vaccines, but it's particularly exploded since the pandemic. Conversations surrounding vaccines have, worryingly, become political and dominated by misinformation. According to the World Health Organization, or WHO, in 2021, global vaccine coverage dropped from 86% to 81%. Additionally, 25 million children under 1 did not receive basic vaccines, the highest number since 2009, and since 2019, the number of completely unvaccinated children has risen by 5 million. If we want to improve public health, we need to be on the same page about vaccines, and the only way to achieve this is to understand the reservations that some people have about vaccines and address them accordingly. So, let's discuss why some people are vaccine hesitant. I did a quick Google search to see what information or misinformation was out there, and it did not take me long to find the National Vaccine Information Center, or NVIC. I have to give some credit where credit is due. I appreciate that they cite their sources. The website itself looks pretty professional. It has an air of legitimacy, but to use a Shakespearean expression, it's dressed in borrowed robes. To see what I mean, let's see what it has to say about vaccines. Firstly, it claims that, like the first vaccine for smallpox, every vaccine licensed by the US Food and Drug Administration and recommended by Centers for Disease Control officials and medical trade associations carries a risk for serious complications such as brain inflammation, which can lead to chronic brain and immune system damage or death. Which sounds pretty scary. I'm not a parent, but I could totally imagine why some parents would be hesitant to vaccinate their kids after reading something like that. But hold on, it's true that vaccinations do cause some minor side effects, including a short fever, fatigue, muscle aches, and some redness at the site of injection. It's also true that vaccines carry minute, very minute, risks of more severe complications, allergic reactions, and death. This is acknowledged by the CDC, but we need to remember what vaccines are protecting us from. Let's take the measles, mumps, and rubella, or MMR vaccine, as an example. According to a 2013 study, for every 10,000 children that get vaccinated, about 4 will have a febrile seizure 7 to 10 days post-vaccination. This works out to a 0.04% chance. Contrast that to the odds of dying, which you could say is the most severe illness, from measles. According to a 2020 article, the overall mortality rate of all cases of measles in the US is about 1 in 1,000, which works out to 0.1%. In addition, in the US, from 2002 to 2016, there were 1,018 recorded measles hospitalizations, of which 34 resulted in death. That works out to an inpatient mortality rate of about 3.3%. So, mathematically, if you're worried about the MMR vaccine, you should be way more worried about the measles virus, and you should definitely get vaccinated. And if we're going to talk about the risks of vaccination, it's only fair to talk about its enormous benefits. According to the CDC, since vaccines have been introduced, the number of cases of diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, etc. have all nosedived. Now, I don't know about everyone else, but I really enjoy living in a society where I'm not constantly scared I'm gonna get polio. Now, on the topic of vaccines and autism, the only positive thing that I can say about the NVIC's stance on this is that, at the very least, they don't say that vaccines definitely cause autism, which would be an outright lie. They're more classy about how they present their misinformation, stating, "Due to a lack of enough methodologically sound studies conducted and published in the medical literature, the 2013 IOM Committee," as an aside, IOM stands for Institute of Medicine, but they've now changed their name to the National Academy of Medicine, or NAM, was unable to determine if the early childhood vaccine schedule recommended by the CDC and medical trade associations is or is not associated with the development of the following chronic brain and immune disorders and disabilities in children: asthma, atopy, allergy, autoimmunity, autism, learning disorders, communication disorders, developmental disorders, intellectual disability, attention deficit disorder, disruptive behavior disorder, tics and Tourette's syndrome, seizures, febrile seizures, and epilepsy. Wow, it seems like vaccines may be linked to not just autism, but a whole smorgasbord of conditions. Let's see what evidence they have to back this up. They cite some pages in the Childhood Immunization and Safety Schedule, a book published by the NAM. Now, while the book does admit that there isn't as much research on schedules of immunization as there is on individual vaccines themselves, it repeatedly asserts that there's no evidence to suggest that the current vaccine schedule is linked to any of these conditions. Now, some may think, oh, well, just because there's no evidence to suggest a link now doesn't mean that there won't be evidence in the future. But this logic is problematic, because yes, theoretically, new evidence may come forward in the future. Theoretically, anything can happen. Heck, an article could be published tomorrow in Nature asserting the existence of fairies on the Galapagos. However, given the evidence we already have on vaccine efficacy, what's the likelihood that a methodologically sound, peer-reviewed study will uncover some sort of deep, dark secret? Incomprehensibly slim. We can't make decisions based on what could theoretically happen in the future. We must rely on the aggregate of the data available to us now. In the same way that we accept that there is no evidence of fairies living on the Galapagos, we must accept that there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism or any of the illnesses that the NVIC lists. So, for all intents and purposes, there are no fairies on the Galapagos, and vaccines are safe. A slight tangent into the vaccine and autism myth in particular, it started with an article by Andrew Wakefield, published in 1998, linking the MMR vaccine to autism. Since its publication, the article has been debunked and retracted by the journal. Almost all of Wakefield's co-authors have withdrawn their support for the article, and Wakefield has been banned from practicing medicine. Wakefield's study suffered from numerous flaws, including a small sample size, a reliance on anecdotes, and outright fraudulent behavior. He also had a conflict of interest since he was involved in a lawsuit against the makers of the MMR vaccine. This supremely flawed study has sparked a seemingly endless debate, sequestering resources that could otherwise be more effectively invested elsewhere. We really ought to have stopped having this conversation years ago. Some people may still be unconvinced about the safety of vaccines. Some claim that vaccine complications are underreported. Here's another quote from the NVIC. It is estimated that only about 1% of all adverse events following vaccination, including injuries and deaths, are reported to VAERS. But let's talk about VAERS, or the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. It's a system managed by the CDC and the US Food and Drug Administration that aims to detect potential safety issues in vaccines. It's what's called a passive reporting system. That is, it relies on people to come forward and make a report if an adverse reaction is experienced after vaccination. Now, admittedly, there are issues with the VAERS. Underreporting does happen to an extent. For example, if someone experiences some soreness after receiving a vaccine, it's unlikely they're going to report that. But on the flip side, if someone becomes really sick after receiving a vaccine, let's say the person develops encephalitis, they're more likely to report that, even if the encephalitis was due to something completely unrelated to the vaccine. Let's remember, just because A happens before B does not mean that A causes B. So someone reporting an adverse reaction with the VAERS isn't evidence that a vaccine is unsafe. The truth is, the VAERS doesn't give us any definitive evidence of causal links between vaccines and adverse events. But that's okay, because that's not really why it exists. It's meant to identify potentially concerning data trends, which scientists must then investigate further to see if there really is a relationship, and if there is one, make changes to improve safety. In fact, this is precisely what happened with polio vaccines. In 1997, the polio vaccine schedule was adjusted in response to some cases of vaccine-induced paralysis, and now severe side effects after polio vaccinations are even more exceptionally rare. VAERS data was also behind initial reports linking the COVID-19 vaccine to myocarditis. Scientists investigated the link and determined that the benefits of the vaccine still outweighed the risks, given that the risk of developing myocarditis is 16 times greater in those infected with COVID-19 than those who are uninfected. Scientists do their due diligence. If there's something concerning, it is investigated. The scientific community strongly advocates for vaccination precisely because the evidence for it has held up so well despite so much scrutiny. But wait, some may say, what about thimerosal? That's a form of mercury that's found in all sorts of vaccines. How could it possibly be a good idea to inject ourselves with mercury? Or what about formaldehyde? Why are we using vaccines with ingredients that we also use to embalm dead bodies? Or what about this, and that over there? There's an endless list of seemingly suspect ingredients in vaccines, and I don't have time to do a deep dive into all of them, but the bottom line is they're either perfectly harmless, or found in such low concentrations that they're perfectly harmless. Thimerosal is a mercury-based preservative used in vaccines, but it contains ethyl mercury instead of methyl mercury. Methyl mercury is found in fish, and that's the type that is harmful. Ethyl mercury doesn't accumulate in our bodies like methyl mercury, and so doesn't cause harm. There's no evidence to suggest that thimerosal in vaccines is in any way harmful, and get this, it hasn't been used in childhood vaccines since 2001 anyways. Concerned about formaldehyde? Surprise! There's already formaldehyde in us. And that's actually a good thing, as it's important in amino acid and DNA synthesis. In fact, a 2-month-old 5-kilogram baby would have about 1.1 milligrams of formaldehyde in their circulation, which is an amount 1,500 times bigger than what the baby would receive from a vaccine. Okay, so why, given all this information, all this science, all this data, are we still not able to change some people's opinions about vaccines? Change comes from within. Okay, but in a less cliched way, ultimately, everyone's free to believe whatever they want to believe, really. I can present mountains of evidence all day long, but I can't force people to pay attention or care, and People are free to make decisions about what they want to do with their bodies. It's hard to say this without sounding like a tyrannical dictator, but in a way, this freedom is almost an obstacle. How do we promote public health while also respecting individuals' rights? I don't really have a good answer to this question. I think the most important thing is education. The more we talk about the good science and data behind vaccines, the more people will vaccinate. But the sad truth is, education can fail. It seems like the anti-vaccination movement is stronger than ever, and it's not just vaccines. We're living in an era marked by misinformation about everything under the sun. So, this video is my small way of taking action. If you've made it this far, thanks for hearing me out. Have I changed your opinion?